Hello, and welcome to the most recent episode of the Real Film Podcast. My name's Phil.
And I'm Corey.
And today we're going to be continuing on with our monthly challenge that we've been doing through 2021, in which we sort of set ourselves a genre that we are less familiar with to sort of go out and explore it a little bit more and find out what's good there. Because we've got quite a wide film knowledge between us, but it doesn't often go really, really deep into some specific genres. So recently we've done 70s and 80s slashers, we've done 80s teen movies, and then this is the third one. So Corey, do you want to sort of talk a little bit about why spaghetti westerns and what actually makes a spaghetti western?
Sure. Well, I mean, spaghetti westerns kind of started. It surprised me actually that spaghetti westerns, the longevity of spaghetti westerns, really didn't last very long. People say that the first one's around 1962, and it went on to sort of the beginning of the 70s with a few added extra films in the late 70s. But it's a genre that was called spaghetti westerns because of Italian directors who loved American westerns, and obviously spaghetti Italian. You can guess the rest. Well, I mean, one thing we learned straight away from this is that in Japan they call them macaroni westerns, which is amazing.
The best thing I've ever heard. Yeah. Why do we not call it macaroni westerns?
I mean, as a genre, I think it's made famous by people like Sergio Leone and Sergio Corbucci. People we'll talk about later. I mean, first of all, before we start talking about like our favorite films, the most beloved films of the genre, what did you think while watching all of these? I mean, we've watched some bad films while doing this challenge, but what about this challenge in particular? Did you like it?
Yes, I actually think this has been my favorite of the genres we've done so far. There isn't that I haven't watched a film or rewatched a film that I thought is bad. There have been ones that have been better than others for sure. There's a couple that really stick out as, one in particular that is a really incredible piece of cinema. But on the whole, I think this has actually been really, really good, which I wasn't quite expecting. I've seen the big ones in the genre, but I've never seen too many westerns in all. There's a bit of stigma around westerns as it is anyway. So it was trying to shake that and actually enjoying them. I had a lot of fun with this one. I mean, after a while, you do get a little bit tiresome of the same setting, and you always see Mexican banditos with big sombreros and the bullet slings all over both sides and stuff like that. That maybe some of that visuals gets, but I mean, I think that's only because we've watched so many in a short space of time. Normally you'd have years between these. So how did you find it?
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I mean, like you said, Western. I think, more for me, I'd say Western's not a genre that I particularly reach out to. I mean, I've seen the most famous ones, both spaghetti and American. The American ones from like the 40s and 50s. I've seen the most famous ones, but I never really thought to expand it. But I'm glad I did because spaghetti western is not an underappreciated genre. I think a lot of people love it. A lot of people of a certain age love them. But there is a lot of craft in there, and I've found that out. I mean, it seems like a perfect opportunity to transition into like what are the most iconic. Let's talk about the ones that basically we've already seen. We know it. And I mean, you start with the Dollars Trilogy, obviously, the most famous spaghetti westerns. First one, Fistful of Dollars. What did you think on the rewatch?
I actually liked it more than the first time I watched it. I probably would have watched this when I was at university, maybe school. And I probably school actually. I don't think I appreciated it as much as I potentially should have. The first time I saw this, I definitely hadn't seen Yojimbo, the Akira Kurosawa film. That this is sort of loosely based on. I mean, it's not like it's an adaptation or anything. It just It's sort of a remake that sort of follows roughly the same story and then puts it in the Western setting. I hadn't seen Yojimbo when the first time I watched this. So watching it again, I can almost see that it's almost like a bit of a love letter for Sergio Leone to Yojimbo, uh, and I thoroughly enjoyed it. I mean, I think each of the Dollars trilogies has some really they all have their own importance, but I think Fistful of Dollars is arguably the most. It's not necessarily the best, but it's arguably the most important because it's the one that sort of reinvented the Western genre and sort of one of those that I think really made spaghetti westerns quite serious as well. So this was 64. Um, I think it's people started taking them really seriously at this point, and I think one of the reasons why it's so effective is because it's so simple. You know, we will go on to talk about a few dollars more and the good, bad, and the ugly, but especially good, bad, and the ugly, it's more like an epic. There's a lot of elements to it that make it amazing. But I think one reasons why Fistful of Dollars always sticks out is because it is pretty simple, but just superbly executed.
Yeah, I completely agree. I'm the same as you. I think I watched when I was about 16. Obviously, I didn't really know what were considered the good movies of the world, and obviously used IMDb Top 250 to sort of help me out. We now know that's pretty. It's not a very trustworthy thing, but in my head, for a long time, just because I watched all of them in a day, I think, when I was like 15.
Christ.
And in my head, they gradually got better, but I actually disagree now. I actually really, really enjoyed Fistful of Dollars, and like you said, it's really important as well. I think while most of Leone's work, you can see sort of that cliche version, what people think of when they think spaghetti western. But I would say this one is almost the epitome of that because it's very simple, it's very self-contained, and it doesn't try to like overstretch. It just completely focused on its style and story, and I think it's really, really great. Um,
Absolutely.
but yeah, and I think obviously introduction of Clint Eastwood. He's
And what a fantastic performance from him as well. You know, obviously rewatching all of these, he sort of just manages to become the character. But I think in that first one, he's iconic as well. He has that grimace where he sort of like squints in both eyes and like, yeah, he's always got the cigarette in the mouth and like all that. I think that is iconic in itself. And I think when people think of a Western, the two things that always jump to mind, they think of that, and I think they think of the music from The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. Yeah, wow, 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 wow.
wow,
You know, and
two great impressions there.
and do you know what I think? Do you know what something I forgot is I didn't realize that was only in The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly. I think because I probably watched all three in a very short space of time originally, but I watched more space out this time, and I totally forgot that it's only in the third one, that music.
Yeah,
Uh,
I guess I knew it was only in the third one, but I kind of forgot what the other two films' music was like, and it's still great.
yeah,
This is one thing that's really consistent over this entire watching experience is that all the music in most of these films is fantastic.
yeah. I mean, Morricone is just absolutely iconic. I mean, we'll talk about it a little bit later, but am I right in saying that he also did the score for The Great Silence?
I'm pretty sure he does the score for most of the films we watched for this.
Yeah, but I mean, you could very easily like they're the same genre and they're sort of similar in a lot of the instruments they use and some of the tones and stuff like that. You could very easily just make the same score again and again, or just have this really bland, remake of all of them. But they are all incredible. Like every one of his scores is incredible. So why don't we talk a little bit about A Few Dollars More? How did you find A Few Dollars More when rewatching it?
I think the first two films are good for different reasons. The first one's great because it's very self-contained, it doesn't overstretch, and the second one is great because it tries to expand a little. And one thing I really liked about it as well was in my head, I'd always got it in my head that in these movies, Clint Eastwood is kind of untouchable in terms of like wit and ability with the weapon. But I always forget that Levon Cleef in this movie is he kind of matches him. And
Yeah,
I mean, for the most of the movie, it's his plan. It's his plan that they're doing. And yeah, I liked it. I actually think Fistful of Dollars is maybe a tad better. There's not a lot in it, of course.
yeah,
But I would say, yeah, I think Fistful of Dollars is just better. But on its own, for a few dollars more, is still such a fantastic movie. Such a great
it is.
example.
I think it's incredible too. I think potentially one of the only reasons why, or one of the reasons why I prefer Fistful of Dollars to A Few Dollars More. Or do you know what's weird? It's actually called For a Few Dollars More.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've always just said a few dollars more. I've never added or don't often add the four.
Well,
But
then no
anyway,
one knows what film you're talking about, Phil.
clearly not. No, but one of the things that I um, noticed when rewatching it is that it does feel a little bit more like, it doesn't have as much narrative cohesion as the two either side, the ones either side of it, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like some of the scenes get a little bit stunted, where like a thing happens and then another thing happens, rather than like A to B to C to D. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I feel like they're self-contained in themselves a little bit more than it's not saying that they just feel like a bunch of sequences put together, but I feel like you're sort of like jumping a little bit. Like it doesn't flow quite as well as the other two do.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, it's not a bad film in any. It's still a very very excellent film. I think that's. But I mean, like you're splitting hairs there, aren't you? When you start picking between these three films, I mean, I'd probably say The Good, the Bad, the Ugly is the best, but still splitting hairs on what's good and what's bad about each one. You know.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. I mean, one thing I actually really liked about it as well was the villain, who obviously pops up in a lot of pops up. The actor obviously pops up in a lot of these westerns that we watched. I don't remember his name, unfortunately. I know he's an Italian guy. Um, but yeah, I actually thought it was a really good villain. Um, a little bit, he had a little bit more to him than a lot of like Western baddies, I guess. And it just, I think it went that extra mile to sort of not make him imposing, but make him sort of fractured, make you kind of understand why he's a baddie. And I think that's quite important in a villain. So I'm quite glad it did that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely. So let's. I mean, we could talk. I mean, when it comes to spaghetti westerns, you could talk about Leone for ages. But let's quickly just go on to The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly before we start talking about anything else. Um, as I say, I think this is the best of the trilogy, and the only other film I think this is potentially in contention for the best western or spaghetti western of all time would be Once Upon a Time in the West. But I didn't get a chance to rewatch it. So in my head at the moment, The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly is the best, but I need to rewatch Once Upon a Time in the West to like
Yeah,
make that decision. But I do think The Good and Bad, the Ugly is still a phenomenal film. I think so many when you see people talking about westerns now, on spaghetti westerns, and the cliches and the tropes and stuff like that, so many of them come from this film.
yeah,
Um, you have the title screens introducing everyone. You know, when you have the ugly Eli Wallach who plays him. Wallach, doesn't matter. When he's like comes smashing through the window and it freeze frames and scroll writes the ugly, you know, and then it has some more scenes going on, and you see Lee Von Cleef come back and he's the bad, and then you know Clint Eastwood as the good. I think is iconic in itself, and I think one of the reasons why this film works so well. It has such a long runtime of nearly three. I don't think it's quite 3 hours, but it's nearly 3 hours. But it balances all three characters so well. Like
mm,
it in the previous two, Clint Eastwood feels like the leading man, whereas I think in this, there's such a balance between all three characters that it feels like all three men's stories. So when they come to a head in the Mexican standoff at the end, it just feels so momentous. I knew what was coming, but I still got shivers up my spine when it got to that scene, because it feels like such a moment of these three like deeply important characters as well, especially because Lee Von Cleef is in the previous film, and though that I don't think they make any specific references to him and Clint Eastwood. There is some sort of hint at their relationship previously, but it doesn't like, oh, I remember you from this thing ago.
yeah,
So it makes the ugly, as it were, it makes him feel just as important as those two.
yeah.
Like you've got this guy come into what could have been a relationship you are already familiar with, but he slots in perfectly. Yeah.
Well, I think the reason as well it's just so good is that obviously, like you said, it feels more epic, and when long films do that, they like their runtime makes sense. You know, you're not slogging your way through this really long movie. But one thing it does really well in this like really long runtime is it doesn't just obviously the backdrop is the Civil War, and I think what I got from it is that constantly the Civil War is sort of in their path, like in their path to prosperity, I guess. And even though what they're doing is bad, what they're searching for gold, I guess. It's not exactly a honest living, but it kind of felt to me like they were mentioning stuff about how like even though like you may take sides on the war, but whatever you think, the war was just kind of in the way of people's prosperity. In like it kind of stopped progression a little bit. And I felt like there wasn't loads of focus on it, but there was just enough to have a message about the war in it. Like when Clint Eastwood and Eli Wallach, when they're sort of trying to cross that river in a fantastic scene. It's such a good scene that is as well. And they're like talking to the captain, is it, of the North? Um,
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
yeah, I think there's just it's just it doesn't overtake the main story, but it makes the runtime relevant, basically.
yeah.
And I think that's why the movie is so good. And obviously, you've got all the iconic stuff. The music's fantastic, and like you said, it balances three characters like perfectly. But I mean,
Yeah.
like you said, it kind of is up for debate what like people consider to be the best. Is it this or is it Once Upon a Time in the West? Me personally, I prefer Once Upon a Time in the West. I know we're
Hmm.
talking a lot about Leone, but let's be honest, he is the one who he dominates this genre completely. Once Upon a Time in the West for me is not only like the best spaghetti western, it's also one of the best films ever made. And
Yeah.
although I think Good and the Bad and the Ugly has better music and I think it has a better final standoff, I do think Once Upon a Time in the West consistently. I mean, it's 3 hours long. I think it is just every single scene is made with complete craft and it goes the extra mile. You know, I think there can be so many throwaway scenes in a 3 hour Western, but Leone kind of just said, you know what, we're going to make the best one yet. And I mean, it's got one of the best opening scenes of all time as well. So, I mean, I could go on more about it. I mean, the casting of Henry Fonda's absolutely phenomenal as well. But yeah, it's my personal favorite, but you know, it's up for debate, I guess.
I think the only reason, and again, this is splitting hairs level of like nitpicking. The only reason I think I say I prefer The Good, the Bad, the Ugly is because when watching them both originally, I think I felt the runtime more in Once Upon a Time in the West. But again, I haven't rewatched it in a long time, so I might rewatch it and it might fly by.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much the only reason because they're quite different in themselves as well. I think when you're watching The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly, you're aware that you're watching part of the Dollars trilogy. You're
Yeah.
aware that you're watching Clint Eastwood, and like there's all these other things in there too. Whereas with Once Upon a Time in the West, you've got Henry Fonda and Charles Bronson, and like he makes it aware. Leone makes it aware that you're watching a different kind of western as well.
Yeah,
Um,
obviously there's
so
all
yeah.
that backstory of obviously that's him going to America and making these westerns. And again, I don't know
Mm,
how true this is. Someone did tell me that obviously his passion project was Once Upon a Time in America, the like 4 hour gangster epic, which is another fantastic movie. But you know, in order to make that, the Americans wanted him to make a western because that's what he's famous for. And obviously another one he made was Fistful of Dynamite or Duck You Sucker, whichever you want to call it, which is the movie I recommended to you. So what did you think
yes,
of it?
yes. So this is the one of the 5 films that we've set out for us to watch. We're recommending each other one film. So yeah, excuse me. Yeah, I got a fistful of dynamite. I had a absolute ton of fun watching this. It's got a couple of problematic moments, but for the most part, I think it feels different when it comes to, like, as we said, we watched a lot of these spaghetti westerns together. I think it feels very different, considering that you've got what seems to be a trope in a lot of these where you have the Mexican bandit befriending the white non-Mexican guy, whether in this case he's where in this case you have the Mexican bandit, the Mexican outlaw, meeting an Irish guy, ex-IRA guy. Um, and I think their relationship is one part of this film that makes it so fun to watch because they're so fun together. their relationship just has a lot more enjoyment in it than a lot of other ones. They are just silly together a lot in a good way. In a good way, they just feel genuine together. The chemistry is fantastic. I think it's a little bit longer than most westerns. It's like 220, I think, or just shy of 220. I think most usually come in at like 130, 140. But honestly, it flew by for me. I think it has a lot to say as well. It has some really, really touching and moving moments as well. One thing that really, really stuck with me is that shot. I actually texted you as soon as I finished. I texted you to tell you like this
Yeah,
really, really moved me. Is when there's like a sweeping high angle shot across. I don't know what they are. They're like trenches or ditches or something that are
yeah,
probably 10 foot deep, full of Mexican revolutionaries, and they're just surrounded. Each of these pits is just surrounded by the army, and as the sort of ditches start coming into shot, they just start shooting at them, and it just sweeps on. The shot's probably only about 30 seconds, 45 seconds long, but it just sweeps along just as all of these pits are just being filled with bullets, and they're just like massacring them all. And there's lots of moments like that where you just have the revolutionaries helpless and the army just completely gunning them down. And I think that's where some of the like there's really good moments that come out of that too, like when I can't remember what his name is, the Irish guy, what his character's name is,
neither do I.
John Mallory,
Oh
I
yeah.
think, when he saves Juan Miranda. That's the Mexican bandit. When he saves Juan, he's like tied up against the wall, and then you know he's about to be shot, and you're like, oh, he's about to die, and then you hear the "duck, you suckers," and then the fucking wall just explodes behind him, and he comes along on the motorbike and he rescues him and stuff. And I think it's stuff like that. It just feels different to other westerns by using things like that, using the "duck, you sucker" just before the explosion happens. And I just, as I say, I had a lot of fun with it. I think the only two hang-ups I had were right near the start. Juan rapes a woman, and it's really, really throwaway, and then you're supposed to have quite a lot of fun with this Mexican bandit afterwards. I
Yeah,
think that's something that I came from a lot of these films. Is non-consensual sex is an issue in quite a lot of these films. It's so throwaway in a lot of them, and I think that's really, really problematic. And then the only other thing, which isn't problematic, is just I don't understand it. I said this to you, I don't understand what the final shot is about.
yeah.
When, spoiler alert, when John Mallory gets killed and blows himself up, Juan looks shocked and stunned, and then he looks down the camera and just says, "What about me?" And then the film ends. And it's the only experience of fourth wall breaking. And I don't know. I feel like if it was just a shot of him just looking lost, I would have got the "What about me?" message. It was just I don't understand why he has to look down the camera and say it.
Yeah.
I was just
Yeah.
that just, but I mean that's inconsequential. It's just a little bit of a I don't know. I don't understand why that was the last shot. But outside of that, as I say, I had a lot of fun. I think it's using the Mexican Revolutionary sort of background, the setting, fantastically as well.
Well, I
Um,
mean, I did a bit of cursory reading about the genre, and it's a little more complex than just being spaghetti westerns. There's the ones that came later on in the late 70s, but there's also kind of a mixture of the Leone types, which are sort of Dollar Trilogy kind of types that are a little more popcorny and stuff like that. But then there's movies like this, which obviously is Leone as well, but there's a whole string of more political ones that try and they have some stuff to say about the Mexican Revolution. I mean, there's another film that we watched for this later, which is similar. But no, I think this is a really good one. I think you're right. It does have some. One thing that I find pretty questionable, but to be honest, it's kind of just the time. Um, is that Rod Steiger, who plays the Mexican Revolutionary, is from New York and he's American.
oh yeah,
The fact is, though, he's really good in it. It's a
yeah.
fantastic performance. It's just, in this day and age, you wouldn't be able to do that. Let's be honest.
No,
But yeah,
no, an American putting on a Mexican
yeah,
accent. Yeah,
and I think you're right about the opening scene. I guess the point of it is to be like almost like a power play because obviously they've been treating him like shit on this coach, and then it turns out that he's not like a dumb like peasant, but there's other ways to show that you don't need to have this horrible thing. And you're meant to root for this guy later on, so it's kind of like I'm not sure about it, but yeah, it's a really great film. And I mean, I don't think this is like this means nothing because his entire filmography is amazing. It's probably my least favorite Leone film, but
Mm.
I mean that's like they're all so good. Like you
I think
cannot.
it's probably the most I don't want to say necessarily. I think the most fun because it's not quite as serious as the Dollars Trilogy and stuff like that. I think it's the one that you can uh, enjoy effortlessly more. Do you
Yeah,
know what I mean?
yeah,
Because it's not trying to be as I don't think it's trying to be as good as a lot of other Leone films. I think there's just I think I'm pretty sure as well it was the last western that he did. I could be wrong there, but I think I read that it was the last
yeah.
western that he did.
I think it is. Yeah,
Um
1971
and
was it?
yeah, so it's quite late, and I feel like that's potentially why it's a little bit less serious. He was probably a little bit fed up with making just westerns at that time. You know, he'd made quite a lot by that point in a short space of time. So I imagine it was just him trying to have a bit of fun with the genre, and I do feel like that comes across. But it does mean that it's not quite as good as his other films. But I still really enjoyed it. I'm really glad you suggested it. So
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's saying it's his worst film is it seems so harsh, but I mean, let's move on to the movie that you asked me to watch, which was Cemetery Without Crosses, which for ages, like for the past like 2 weeks or whatever we've been doing this, trying to watch these films, I've been calling it Cemetery Without Horses, and I don't know why. That's I got it in my head, and I just couldn't stop calling it. But yeah, I mean, finally, a non-Leone film we're going to talk about.
yeah, this one's directed by
Yeah,
Robert
who
Hosson.
is also the star. A very quiet, Clint Eastwood-esque, I would say, star. Very minimal words.
Mm.
Um, I think when I first started watching this movie, it felt a bit run of the mill at first. There wasn't anything that was really grasping me, but I think as it gets into it, some of the storytelling is absolutely impeccable in this film. Um,
Hmm.
there's
Yeah, absolutely.
like a lot of scenes with barely any dialogue, and it tells you so much. I mean, I know that we both have our own sort of separate favorite scene in particular. What my favorite by far is there's a scene where the main character he goes to kidnap the daughter of um, the villain, brings her back, and then two guys who are kind of people that are kind of on his side, they basically rape her. And while it's happening, him and another woman who asked him to do the kidnapping are outside and they're staring at each other. They don't say anything to each other, but you can see the kind of questioning of what's going on in their eyes, in their faces, and it's all it is, and it's absolutely fantastic. I'd say the only thing that maybe brings this down again to compare it to Leone, I know it's kind of thingy, but I think there's you don't take a lot of characters away from it. I don't think. I mean, I think the main character's great, but he's also kind of forgettable. Like a day after, I was struggling to sort of remember who the people were, and it started to lose me a little bit by the end. But I think it's pretty consistent for the most part, and it's really enjoyable and just some impeccable storytelling, which you don't usually see that much often in westerns.
Absolutely, yeah. It's one of the reasons why I suggested it to you because I just thought it just really stuck. As you say, it's not the most memorable film ever, and it doesn't have the most memorable characters, and it might not be as good as much of Leone's work. But I do think it's different as a western in much of its actual like construction, um, because of there's a huge lack of dialogue throughout, and I do think that's very effective. Um, yeah, you mentioned that sort of the scene where she's in the what is it the where do they hold the woman?
It's like the
Is it a
ghost town, isn't it?
yeah, it's like empty
Saloon.
saloon or something like
Yeah,
that. But that is the best scene in the film, in my opinion. But another one I really, really liked as well, which also uses the sort of show don't tell technique, is the dinner scene. I remember watching that for the first time, and it really, really struck me because I had no idea where that was going. You know, he's sat down for dinner for the first time, and he's sort of infiltrating this um, gang that's run by this family, and slowly throughout the meal, he's sort of catching the eye of the daughter, who's the one who ends up getting kidnapped. He catches her eye, and then the brother sat next to her, and then the dad, and then he goes back to eating, and then he looks down the table. And people are eating. No one's saying anything, but they keep eating. And then slowly, as he goes on, he realizes more and more people are looking at him, and it gets. For me, I just found it so tense. It's so tense, and then it's eventually. I can't remember what he opens up. Is it like the
Can
salt
of
or the
something, isn't
pepper?
it?
Yeah, it's a
Oh
can
yeah,
of
maybe, yeah.
something like salt or pepper or something, and he goes to open the top, and one of those like I don't know what they are, like snake spring toys comes flying out. The whole place just erupts into laughter. But I think that's so well constructed, which is kind of funny because I found out it was actually Sergio Leone who directed it. But I don't think that scene sticks out as a like better directed than the rest of the
Yeah,
film.
it's definitely a great
Do you know what I mean?
scene
If
though.
it works incredibly well, and it's super effective. I do think the film on the whole isn't amazing, but there's lots of moments in it that really stick out as really well made pieces of cinema. And for a genre like this, it's really great to see someone trying something a little bit different.
Yeah, definitely. And well, we watched it on YouTube for free, so you can't argue with that.
Yeah.
I mean, just go to YouTube and you can watch it. It's great quality as well. Um, Sometimes YouTube is good, guys.
Yes. Is it? Oh, they're all blurred into one a little bit. Am I right in saying Cemetery Without Crosses is the one that starts in black and
Yeah.
white and then goes to color? Yeah, I think that was really cool as well. To see that in a film from like the late
Mm.
'60s, I think was really cool as well, because I almost expected it to. I hadn't seen anything about it before the first time I watched it, and I think it's really effective because I was like, oh, it's a black and white film, and then you have that horse chase, and then it goes into the open,
Yeah.
sweeping landscapes.
To be fair, even that opening scene's great, where the whole reason, the whole setup for this kidnapping stuff is because this woman's husband has been murdered, and that whole thing where they hang him, I think a lot of people would just like cut away, but instead it kind of shows him with the noose around his neck, and then just kind of goes down to his legs, and you see his legs swinging
Yeah, it's very
when the horse. That's a
effective.
really fantastic. It's just very inventive, a lot of it, and I
Yeah.
think it's a very. I mean, this is the first time I'd ever heard of it, and I feel like people could be talking about this one a lot more. So let's move on to the three that neither of us had seen. Um, I think it's a good place to start with probably another pretty iconic spaghetti western, which is Django.
Django.
Django, which obviously most people will know through Tarantino creating Django Unchained. But this one is basically not what it's based on, but it's very inspirational. I've got to say, I, I had bigger expectations, I think.
Mm.
It's not that I didn't like it. I mean, it's very well known for being banned in a lot of countries because of its violence. But the problem with movies from the '60s that are banned for violence, you watch them now, it's not it's not particularly like gruesome. I think there's one bit in it where where Django's hands get bashed, and it's pretty brutal. I imagine by like 1966 standards, that's pretty brutal. I think for me, the biggest problems with it is that one, the dubbing, like a lot of these films, the dubbing is kind of off. And while I can deal with that, while I can adjust to that, it's the dubbing of Django himself, because Frank Nero plays Django, who very imposing character. He looks and feels like a Western protagonist, 100%.
Yeah.
But the dubbing, I don't know, it kind of just took all kind of presence away from him a little bit.
Am I right in saying that a different man dubbed the English?
I
I'm pretty
think it would.
sure.
I think it is.
I'm pretty sure. I can't. I can have a look.
Because in a film later on that we'll talk about, like very briefly, he
Yeah.
is the main character again, and he sounds so much better because he is speaking English. But
He is. It is dubbed by a different man called Tony Russell, and I think the only reason I know that is because I I watched the other film first, and he sounded so different in this, and there's not too many years between them, so I just googled it, and yeah, and it turns out to be. And I don't. It doesn't help that I saw the other film first, so like I it kind of threw me off. I was like, this isn't quite how he should sound. But I also it just doesn't suit him. The voice isn't imposing as
no,
imposing. He just sounds like like a run of the mill guy. He
Yeah.
sounds. Do you know what it is? I thought this is really funny. He's the voice of Django sounds like the guy who should be running the saloon in a western. That's what I thought.
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah.
why I thought that, but I was just like, that's the kind of character he should have been
The thing
voicing.
is, everything around the voice is fantastic. Nero's look is great, his presence is great, and the whole thing about Django carrying around his coffin is really great. I
That
love
is
that.
such a good visual, and it's like
Yeah.
it's almost like a mini mystery in the film. You're like,
Hmm.
what is in the coffin? Because obviously you're expecting like a body or something like that, because it's like covered in mud as well. It's so
Yeah.
effective. That kept me
Yeah.
like, if that wasn't in it, I don't think I would have been quite as gripped, because like until you
Yeah.
find
Me
out
too.
what's inside, I was kind of like, I would, I don't know, I might not have been quite as riveted, but yeah, I think that's
I think I
fantastic.
still get the appeal of Django, and it's not that I didn't enjoy myself watching it. I just think when you think this is basically outside of Leone's work, this is obviously directed by Sergio Capucci, who was mentioned earlier. I think outside of Leone's work, this one would also be considered pretty iconic. But it feels more like the audience that film would have would come more from like a cult side rather than mainstream.
Yeah,
Um, so I don't know. I think I was a little disappointed, but at the same time, I still enjoyed myself to some degree. But I mean, the music is obviously fantastic. I mean, you can hear the Django song at the beginning of Django
yeah,
Unchained, and it's such a good song.
yeah.
Um, but yeah, it was interesting, but I just don't. It kind of disappointed me a little bit.
Yeah. Sorry, I've just seen online that this is also uh supposedly a loose remake of Yojimbo as well.
Yeah,
I
I could see that.
I mean, I can
I
see
can.
that. I
It's very
hadn't.
loose, but
Yeah, it's a lot more loose. I feel like A Fistful of Dollars is
it's
uh
definitely more.
more in line. Yeah.
Yeah,
I don't see this quite as much, but I think the ending is great as well. Like I
yeah, yeah,
he has his hey, obviously, as you say, he has his hands crushed, which the hand crushing bit is really effective. The only bit I didn't find effective is when they're allegedly running horses over his hands. Like,
yeah,
they're just the horses just wouldn't. So there's so many horses, and his hands are tiny. Like, they're not going to fucking stand on his hands, are they? But yeah, I thought the ending was incredible. That's the bit that stuck. One of the bits that stuck with me the most is him leaning on the sort of the cross of the grave, and
yeah,
the guys coming down, the KKK guys coming down, and then being like, "Oh, it's going to be easy." And he just has this way of like, he's sort of like slowly putting the pistol on there and resting it, and you're like, "Oh fuck, he's gonna get fucking shot by these guys. How's he gonna make his way out of it?" And this sort of
yeah,
just snaps back, and he starts like pushing on the lever and shoots. It's completely unrealistic. Like many of these films, they have these like incredibly accurate gunslingers. That is wildly like, no one would be able to make these shots ever. But that doesn't matter with a lot of these films. It doesn't matter at all. You don't sit and think, "Wow, he would not be able to make those shots." Um,
yeah.
yeah, I had a lot of fun with it. As I say, I was a tad let down. I was a tad disappointed. I was expecting a little bit more, but I still think it was really great, and
Yeah.
I'm still glad I watched this one. Yeah, for sure.
Thing is, when you think of what the movies that uh, Tarantino uses for inspiration, they're never like. I mean, they might be masterpieces of a certain like cult style,
Mm,
but they are still quite a unique and I don't know. I don't know how to put it. I guess like you think, like Django and Inglorious Bastards, the original Inglorious Bastards again isn't great, but it
no,
has that sort of like almost cartoony cult style to it. And
yeah.
so I guess in my head I probably shouldn't have had my expectations so high, but that's what kind of ruined it for me. I still liked the film though. I still enjoyed watching it. I guess.
Yeah, yeah. No, I still had a really good time with it too. Should we move on to A Bullet for the General then, which is another
Yeah.
one neither of us have watched. Um, I wasn't that impressed by this film.
Oh,
I
okay.
wasn't very gripped. I still think it's good. I think it's really good, but it felt like I had watched Duck You Sucker first, and I think they're quite similar in
Hmm.
like a lot of the things that happen are quite similar. And I think Bullet for the General is a lot more serious. And I also feel like the main American guy whose name I can't remember, um, Lou Castel as Bill Nino Tate. There you go. Uh, um, he just didn't strike me as a threatening guy at all. And I know he's not meant to be the same kind of threatening guy as Clint Eastwood or any of the other people we've mentioned, but he just doesn't look like he's supposed to be, being paid tens of thousands of dollars to go and kill this general. And I don't know. He looked like a bit of a scrawny American business. He looked like the guy who when you have in these films, you always have like a businessman who's in Mexico trying to make a quick buck that ends up
Mm,
getting shot because he's the slimy little guy who's trying to like cheat people out of their money. To me,
yeah,
that's what I saw when I looked at him, and immediately I was like, oh well, I wasn't hooked there. But then, as I say, it wasn't quite as fun as Duck You Sucker, and they're not the same film, but they're just I saw a lot of similarities, and there was lots of things like the bullet, for example, the golden bullet was I felt like the film, like the first time you see it, I felt like the film is like, oh, what's this for? I feel like it was really obvious what it was for. The film's called A Bullet for the General. I feel like it was like, oh, he's going to use that he's there to, by this point, you don't even know that he's meant to be like hunting down the general to shoot it. But I feel like the name and the reveal are so obvious as what's going to happen. And
yeah,
I was kind of just a little bit like, it took away a little bit of the suspense for me because up until that point, I didn't know what he was doing. Like, you don't know what his motivations are. And I liked that. I was like, why is this guy doing this? And then he has the bullet. And he's gonna assassinate the general. It kind of
I think I kind of disagree with that. Um, well, the first thing is I don't think he's meant to be imposing. I think he's meant to be sneaky, and he looks sneaky. He's on a mission to assassinate someone. He's not on a mission to go and like have a gunfight with someone.
no, I didn't mean like imposing. I meant like he just, I don't know. He didn't look like the kind of guy who would go and like be able to do this. He
I
didn't
don't know.
look.
I think for me, his face and he's quite stoic. I think
Mm,
it did kind of work for me, and I also think that I mean already I was well aware of what was going to come before the bullet. I mean, he sneaks his way into this group a bit, and it's like the only option because he keeps mentioning the general by name. And he's like, "Are we going to go see the general then?" And it's like, okay, well, he wants to kill the general, but I'm not going to lie, I was pretty gripped.
mm,
Anyway, I knew it was going to come. I just wanted to know what was happening, but also while it was happening, I think I enjoyed the sort of the ethical debate that was happening with the bandit leader, which is
mm,
kind of similar to what the bandit in Duck You Sucker was having. Is that do you obviously stand for revolution? I know that the Mexican Revolution in Duck You Sucker, he kind of got forced upon this revolution. He didn't really want to be a part of it, but in this one, it kind of felt more like he's obviously prospering by selling weapons during this thing.
mm,
But is that really fighting for the cause? And then that bit at the end where he has that conversation with the general,
mm.
I think is really great because it kind of I mean, he's quite a nice character. I did like him quite a lot. I don't remember his name. What's the character's name?
El Chuncho.
El Chuncho. That's it. Yeah,
I did like him a lot. He was definitely my favorite part of the film. I think he's super likable. He's great in the role. He's in another. He is the villain
he's in all of them, isn't he?
from.
For a few dollars more, and from Fistful of Dollars,
Yes, yeah. I was going to say yeah. I was
he's
going
in
to say
loads of them, isn't
yeah. He's
he?
great.
He's a good actor, and I think this one actually it surprised me because obviously he's playing the villain in a lot of the other ones, but he's quite a sweet character in the end. Um,
Yeah.
and I don't know. I disagree that I wasn't like when you say like, oh, it just there was no like suspense for you when it actually happened. I kind of disagree with that. I just felt like I knew something was going to happen. It may have
Mm,
failed. I don't know. Um, but I quite liked the relationship they were building as well, the two of them.
mm,
So for me, I think it took a while. Still took a while to get into. I will
yeah.
admit. It definitely does feel like that. It's a bit with like Cemetery Without Crosses, where it takes a little while just to make it feel like not run of the mill.
Yeah.
Um, so yeah, I think by the end I was having a really, really good time with it.
Yeah. I unfortunately I just didn't quite get there, and I didn't really like the ending either. Like, I like the sort of concept of the ending of these two going back to America, and then Nino does this thing that makes Chincho realize what he's doing is wrong and he needs to go back to his bandit ways. I just think the execution felt a little. I shouldn't rag on this film too much because I did like the film. Don't get me wrong, I did really like the film. It was probably just my least favorite out of everything we watched,
Okay.
and it was a little bit sloppy. Where like I don't know, Nino suddenly like he has all this wit and this like he's very clever in the way that he gets Chincho to be on his side, and then when he reveals his like actual motivations to Chincho, he still manages to get him on his side. They're still friends. And then it's when they're in the train station at the end about to go back to America, he suddenly just becomes super sloppy with it. And it was kind of just like a little bit annoying. It was like, this character is meant to be much smarter than this. It was just like when he suddenly pushes in front of all the Americans to buy the tickets. And I can't remember exactly what the line he says is, but he says something about, this is what money buys or something like that. And then it's when they're getting on the train and he's told him this whole, plan. I was like, I believe that he would slip at the end, but this is just like piling it on. Like
Yeah.
I feel like he suddenly became really stupid for no reason. But I like, as I say, I like I like all of what actually happened. I just didn't like the execution quite as much. I think Chincho, like shooting him and then giving the money to the guy who was trying to do the shoe shine, and he just suddenly releases his inner bandit again, and he can go back to being happy again. And he's ripping the suit off while people are chasing him down the train track, shooting him. I think that's really great, and I really liked that.
Mm.
Yeah, I should rag on it too much because I did really like it still, but it just I don't know, I hoped, I wished I liked it more. Basically, that was it.
It's all right. I mean, you're entitled to your wrong opinion. That's fine, Phil.
Clearly,
But
clearly.
let's move on. The final one that we hadn't watched and we watched for this was The Great Silence, another
Yes.
Sergio Corbucci movie. I absolutely love this film. This is fantastic.
This is the best film that came out, like the best film we hadn't already seen, for sure.
This is, for me, this is up there. I'm not saying it's like on par with Once Upon a Time in the West and Good, Bad and the Ugly, but there is not a lot in it to me.
I was going to say it's probably those two and then this film for me.
Yeah, 100%.
I think it was, it was absolutely fantastic. And we talk about Morricone having incredible scores. This is one that stuck with me. I've known like The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly and Once Upon a Time in the West scores for a long time now. I don't think I'd ever heard the score to The Great Silence before. So when I heard it, I was like getting goosebumps. I was like, this is
it's fantastic.
So good. I don't know how I hadn't really heard of this film before. I heard it in passing, but I don't know why more people don't talk about this film. It is like a way to almost reinvent the genre again. This came out in '68, I think. And just by simply setting it in the sort of snow winter tundra instead of the harsh hot desert, I think was just, it still works so well.
I think the snowy western is great. I love snowy westerns anyway. Jeremiah Johnson and McCabe and Mrs. Miller, they're fantastic movies. It also adds an element of survival to a movie. Like, I know that the West is pretty difficult to survive as a gunslinger, but also I think the snow just adds that sort of like natural element to it, which is great. The best thing this movie does is subverts the genre for a really valid reason as well. This is obviously about bounty hunters who basically have taken over this town. It's very corrupt, and they basically use bounties as a way to just corrupt the system, basically. And I think often when we watch westerns, it's obviously there are laws, but it's a relatively lawless place in terms of like and nothing's ever really said about that. And this one actually kind of questions what happens when people are able to sort of take advantage of the law. Even the silent main character uses the law to his advantage by only killing people when they reach for their gun. And it's really great. And I think I've read a little. This movie was on my watch list before we decided to do this, but I didn't know like crazy amounts about it. But I'm very happy I've watched it. I think as well, it benefits from its villain winning at the end. I'm sorry to ruin that for anyone who wants to watch that, but it benefits from that because the whole point is that people were able to take advantage of the system, and it pays off for Klaus Kinski's character. who again is in a lot of these films and is a very legendary actor. He's great in all of them. But this one, I think, is his best performance. He's got such a vicious look about him, Klaus
Yeah.
Kinski.
He's so
Um,
good in this. He's so
yeah,
he's got this fucking shit-eating grin, if you know what I mean. Like he just
yeah.
grins when he like the first bit when Silence. Does he have? I can't remember what if it is. Does he have a full character
I don't
name, or
think
is
he
he
has a
just
full name. But they
they
call him
just refer to him
Silencio,
as
don't they?
Silence, don't they? But yeah.
Yeah,
Anyway, he it's when he goes. He's the woman's asked him to kill a bounty hunter for the first time, to kill Klaus Kinski for the first time, and he goes to the bar and is trying to get him. He's like trying to provoke him to pull his gun out,
yeah,
and Klaus Kinski knows what he's trying to do, so he just fucking revels in that. He gets the other
yeah,
guy to take his gun off, and it's just like he's got this grin on his face. That he's just, yeah, you're a fucking evil bastard, and
yeah.
I think it's so
He's
effective.
fantastic.
And I think
But
this
no, it's such a fantastic film, isn't it? I mean,
absolutely it says a lot more than I think a lot of westerns do as well. Like there's a lot you can dive into. Um, into the setting, and as you say, you talked about the lawlessness, and because the film has a really strange final title card though. It says about something about the massacre of Snow Hill.
yeah,
It treats it as if it really happened, because I saw that and I thought, oh, is this based on true events? So I went
mm,
googled it afterwards. It's not based on true events at all.
mm,
So I was just a little bit like, oh, I read that and I was like, oh, I thought this was, but it's not. But I think it's that really, really. I think sometimes when you get a title card at the end of the film, it's sort of saying what the message is about. I think sometimes you can be like, you're hitting me on the head with a hammer with how like with your message. But I
yeah,
think that even just something as simple as that just really, really like solidifies the message and is a beautiful way to close it out as well. Like it shows it's really, really effective. And I think as well, when we've watched all these other films, when you've watched Django and things like that, you see the hero get injured and they lose the ability to, shoot as well as you think they normally could. You do think he's going to somehow pull it out the bag, but he doesn't, and then they just ride off into the distance. And um I think it's really, really affecting as well. It gave me the same sort of emotion as when I was talking about Duck You Sucker, when we were talking about the people being shot in the pit, the helpless sort of people. When the bandits that have been hiding out in the snowy tundra are all tied up in the saloon, and they all just get gunned down by these bounty hunters. I think that's incredibly effective too.
yeah.
Yeah, incredible film. I'm very, very glad that we watched this one. I think it was yeah, fantastic, really fantastic. So those are all the spaghetti westerns that I've seen, or at least the ones that I think are worth talking about. Is there anything else that you've seen you want to mention?
Yeah. I mean, I watched like maybe like two more just because I was intrigued by the time I'd finished all these. One was Death Rides a Horse. It's like 1967. Um, it's inventive in some ways, and it's got Lee Von Cleef as the protagonist, or one of the protagonists. But it's a bit run of the mill, and it's a little predictable. Probably not on the same standard as anything we watched. But one I did actually watch. Obviously, I said I did some reading into sort of like the history behind spaghetti westerns and stuff, and apparently there was this like resurgence in the late 70s of people kind of like grasping onto the genre a little bit. And one I watched was called Kioma, which stars Frank Nero as well, but this time it's his voice actually speaking. And he plays, although kind of again a slightly dated thing, where an Italian person, plays a half American, half Native American person. Um, but he basically is just this like long-haired, massive beard, sort of like grizzly gunslinger, I think you could call it. And basically, he comes back to a village where his three brothers, his half brothers, who hate him, and his father, and there's like a plague happening, and basically his brothers are kind of just like shoving the people with the plague like away rather than giving them medicine. So it basically just like one man against a lot of men. There's a lot of like westerns, but it's really great, and it's got this really like bleak tone, which kind of makes me think that it's got something a little to do with like the end of the genre, almost like a sad goodbye, I guess. But it's got a really sad ending. But no, I mean, I won't talk a little too much about it. But it's a really great film. That's like the genre would have matured by that point considerably, and Kioma does feel like a mature film. So I think if you want to sort of expand your horizons on spaghetti westerns, that's also a really great film to watch. But yeah, I mean, other than that, I didn't really watch anything else, but I had a good time.
So I think we've covered pretty much all we watched there. What would you say was your favorite and least favorite from? I mean, it could be new or rewatching, but
Well, I think Once Upon a Time in the West is still my favorite, but um, in terms of new by a country mile, The Great Silence is the best one I watched. It's
yeah,
impeccable. It's absolutely amazing. I think worst, not including those like two I mentioned at the end, not Kioma, the other one, Death Rides a Horse. I'd probably say Django just takes it.
yeah.
Just kind of underwhelming a little bit, I
Mm.
think. What
I
about you?
think I think for me the best is obviously The Great Silence, or that's new to me at least. I had a lot of fun with Sucker, but it's not as good. And then I'd probably say, I know it sounds a bit harsh, but I'd probably say Bullet for the General was the worst, in air quotes. It's still a great film, but I just didn't have quite as much fun. And it was one of those where I came out, sometimes when you come out of a good film and you dwell a little bit on the nitpicky stuff that you didn't like about it. Like
Yeah,
it is nitpicky stuff that I don't like, but like I don't know, I couldn't shrug it as much as I could with other films. So I think that's probably my
yeah.
least favorite there.
Yeah, that's fair. I think for me, it was between Bullet for the General and Django, but I think
Yeah.
I enjoyed Bullet for a General a lot more, I think.
Well, I think it for me, it was just Django because I really liked the ending. I really liked the visual of the coffin, and there was just that I came out of it dwelling on the good points more than the bad, and it was the
Yeah, that's
opposite.
fair.
The opposite, and for me, I think that kind of just says my opinions. But yeah, anyway,
Yeah, that's
um,
fair.
I hope you've enjoyed listening. The next time we do this, so for April, we're going to be doing classic horror films. Like we're going to go. The years are going to be a little bit loose, but we're going to go back to the 20s and 30s and things like that. We're going to talk about Nosferatu and Frankenstein and all that sort of stuff. And we'll talk about some really great cinema from. God, a lot of these are going to be near 100, or some of them even over 100 years old now, which is mental to think.
Exciting.
Exciting. But yes, I hope you enjoyed listening. You can find me on Twitter at Philson Wilson.
You can find me at Cosp Jord.
And then you can find Real at Real Reviewing on Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can find us at realreviewing.com. If you head to anchor.fm/Real Reviewing, you can find our podcast. But we're also on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, whatever the Android one is called. But yeah, I hope to catch you next time.
Bye.